All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I was joined by Jeremy Ryan Slate. He's the host of the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show, a historian, and today we looked at the parallels between the United States Republic and United States Empire, along with that of the Roman Empire. And there's a lot of interesting parallels in the history here, and Jeremy is one of the historians that I really respect because of the way he is able to articulate this information and make it digestible and give us some insight into the direction that we're moving in here in the United States and Western nations as a whole when we're looking at the direction of our country. It's safe to say we haven't had a real republic since he says 1913, and I definitely agree with that date. So this is an informative episode. We're really getting a good history lesson here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on. You can subscribe to my Substack, McDermod.substack.com. And also be sure to pick up a copy of my latest poetry book, The Final Judgement. It's available on Amazon now. Go ahead and do that. And you can also book a tarot reading with me one-on-one if you are interested in doing so. And I want to give a special thank you to our one official sponsor, Tranquil Desires here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. They are the one-stop shop for all your holistic wellness and spiritual needs. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's jump into the podcast with Jeremy Ryan Slate. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast for today's show, joined by Jeremy Ryan Slate. Jeremy is the host of the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show, a historian, and I would say one of the most knowledgeable people that I have found in terms of looking at the Roman Empire in particular, and especially when it comes to the parallels of today. I know a lot of people throw that comparison out between America and Rome, but Jeremy really has the knowledge and background to back up those comparisons. So Jeremy, thanks for taking the time to come on the show, man. It's truly a pleasure.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I know a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me about Rome, so I am glad that I'm like kind of the only one you've discovered.
Well, I was gonna say I see people talking about it quite a bit, but very few have gone to the depths and articulate it in the manner that I've found you're able
I
to.
appreciate that.
And it's really a fresh perspective to kind of get that historical background. I mean, because if we lose the stories of history, for example, you hear this a lot. We don't understand our history. We're doomed
Yeah.
to at least repeat it in some fashion. So I think if we look at sort of Rome, and I understand this is over, we're looking at 1,000-year empire, so we're not
Yeah.
necessarily going to be able to dissect all of it.
Well, I think a
Uh,
lot of the problem is too, like a lot of historians, like they get kind of too into the details. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
And I feel like it's kind of understanding, what audience you're communicating to and how are you communicating it. And like, dude, I'm just kind of sure I have the schooling background, but I'm a regular person that understands history. And I think that to me, I think is more important than, knowing every single date and every single person and every single thing. If you understand the narrative and how you get to a place, you can kind of really understand history.
Absolutely. And I come from a teaching and history background. So, I've been in schools, and I think the one problem I see in just the general like public education system, for example, when it comes to history, is it kind of does exactly what you just mentioned, where it is more about dates. We're not necessarily looking at, I mean, you touch on certain themes of the empire, but we don't always like bring it back into a modern day context oftentimes for students in particular. So I think a lot of our population and the education we receive about the Roman Empire, it doesn't always resonate in the same sense to where we can look at modern day parallels and start to kind of understand our own place, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so
Well,
I'd
I think
love to.
part of it
Oh
is
yeah.
the agenda behind it too. You know what I mean? I think
Mm,
a lot of times people approach a history topic because they have a certain agenda they're trying to prove rather than approaching the topic just to learn about the topic, right? And I think even if you look at a lot of the portrayals of Julius Caesar throughout history, guy's definitely not a saint. He's definitely done
mm,
some bad stuff, but I think at the same time, if you look at the era he lived in, he's a man of his era, right? And he
yeah.
was kind of just the one that played the game the best. And there were a long list of guys trying to do the exact same things he did. He just succeeded.
Right, exactly. And but how would you say to start to approach the subject? Because like I said, this is a 1,000-year empire. Its reign and the impact it had is the legacy is still very much felt today, right? So, I mean, when you start approaching this subject, what are some things that you tend to gravitate towards, focus on when we're looking at unpacking the Roman Empire and really starting to put it into a modern context and seeing
Yeah.
where its legacy is still felt? Like, what ways do you start approaching it?
Well, I think first of all, it's understanding a definition of terms. I think a lot of times when people hear Rome, the first thing that comes to mind is the Roman Empire, and they think of Julius Caesar and like, oh yeah, Julius Caesar, he was the first emperor and things like that, and
Mhm.
what's guess what, he wasn't. And I think the thing to actually understand is, as you said, it has an over 1,000-year history, and if you include the Byzantine Empire, you're closing in on 2,000 years, and kind of newsflash for everyone out there, the Byzantines would have also called themselves Romans, right?
Mm.
They're only called Byzantines because the French in the 17th century didn't know how to describe them, so they came up with the phrase Byzantine, because the city of Constantinople, which Constantine named after himself, was actually called Byzantium, right? So that was the first name of the city before it becomes Constantinople. So that's where the idea of in the Eastern Empire, of the idea of the Byzantine Empire comes from. In their mind, they were the Roman Empire.
Mhm.
Now, it's very different to how the traditional Roman Empire was ruled. It's different to what the structures are like, the culture is like. It is very much a distinctively different empire, but it is the Roman Empire if it advanced and kind of moved on. Now, if you're going to look at what is the Roman Empire, you have to understand that Rome essentially is three eras in time. And it crosses over from BC into AD. And I apologize to all of our woke historians out there. I will not be using the terms CE or Common Era because I think it's BS.
Yep, I
Um,
agree with
but
you.
but Rome is founded in 753 BC. It's founded as a kingdom. There's traditionally seven kings, the first of which is Romulus. And there's this discussion of, did Rome give its name to the man, or did the man give its name to the city? Because he's a very mythical founder of Rome. There's, as I said, there's seven kings, and if you look historically, though so much is credited to him, he's actually the least likely to have existed, just because he's kind of this like Mr. Rome character, right? And they try to attribute all these different things to him. So it lasts as a kingdom from 753 to 509 BC. And if you're thinking of kingdom, I think a lot of times people have this idea of like medieval kingship and what that looks like. In,
Mhm.
in actuality, it's closer to like warlords. Meaning, if you ever seen the movie Braveheart,
Mhm.
it's more similar to how the Scots were living in the movie Braveheart. Is more similar to what a Roman kingdom would have looked like. It's a kind of a warlord model. So then in 509, you have the final king is deposed. He's not killed initially. He's kind of kicked out. His name is Tarquin the Proud, or Tarquin Superbus. And from 509 to 31 BC, you have this Republic era, and I think that's the era that our founders looked at, even when they created the American Republic. Now, I think it's interesting as well because if you look at the Republic, it's a republic, but it's also, in how it operates, it is very much an oligarchy,
Mhm.
because you do have this kind of class of people that aren't really acknowledged in a lot of ways, and there's going to be this kind of struggle for several hundred years of getting attention. That's kind of the lower classes. Rome, when it was broken into voting blocks, these voting blocks were called centuries. Centuries because they were originally based on 100. That changes significantly later on. But these voting blocks were they're called centuries because they were pieces of the army, right? That's where the idea of centurion comes from. The guy that leads a group of 100. But these groups, you'd have kind of, I think there was like 17 or 18 voting groups.
Mhm.
80% of the population is represented in the bottom two groups. So they only each had one vote. So that would be two votes for like most of the population. Then the rich people broke themselves into, I think it's like 15 or 16 different classes, and each one of those classes had a vote. So as you can see, it's like super, super, super skewed. It's representative in a lot of ways, but it's very skewed towards those that already have money and power. So
Mhm.
that's the Republic in that era. The last 100 years of it get kind of rough, and that's the era that Julius Caesar lives in. And in 31 BC, it's going to change from being a republic to an empire, and it's going to be an empire from 31 BC. There's a lot of historians that argue this. You could say 31, you could say 23,
Mhm.
31 just to make it clean. After the Battle of Actium, which is when Augustus defeats Mark Antony, and he will later become the first emperor. He's not going to call himself emperor because As I said, Rome was traditionally a kingdom. People hated the idea of kingship. So he comes up with this idea of first citizen. The Roman version of like the Speaker of the House was this guy called Princeps Senatus, or the Prince of the Senate. So he takes that name and he calls himself Princeps. So he's kind of the first among equals in a lot of ways. He'll later take the title of like chief military commander of Rome. That's where imperator comes from, which is where the word emperor will come from. Not something he takes initially. So that's kind of your fall over. It lasts then as a empire in the West until 476, and in the East it's going to last as an empire until 1453. So to me, I think those are the really important things to understand when you're discussing Rome, is kind of just the groundwork and what those different eras look like. And I think when you're looking at modern comparisons, Evan, the thing you have to understand, I think people want to look at it as like do you remember those? It's been a bunch of years since I've been there, but remember those maps at the mall?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you are here. And it's kind of like where you're here. And I think that's how people want to look at history, or even the outlay of Rome. They want to look at kind of this trend, this time and space, and be like, okay, you are here. Yeah. And it's not really like that. There's a lot of similarities to certain things about how the Republic is operating now, but there's also a lot of very similar things to how the Empire operated. So I think it's important to understand that these similarities can help us show us where we're headed or what things can occur, because it's cause and effect. But I think a lot of times it's realizing that it's not like the sign at the mall that says you are here when you're looking at Roman history.
That makes a lot of sense. And what would be some of those similarities? I mean, I know you've talked about them I've listened to you on other shows and talking about them existing simultaneously in a sense. Do you think we're going in a similar route to where we're transitioning more from Republic to Empire? Or are they going to kind of continue to exist in this simultaneous fashion where they kind of play off of one another in a lot of ways?
So that's tough. And I've kind of went both ways on this. I've been talking about the crisis of the third century for a very long time. The third century, meaning the third century AD, somewhere around like 238 to like 284, like somewhere in that area. Because I look at a lot of what Rome was struggling with at that time, and some of those things are very similar. Other of those things are not, right? Like, one of the major things that's happening in the crisis of the third century is military commanders being declared emperor by their army, attacking other emperor claimants, and declaring themselves emperor. Mm-hmm. I don't really see that happening, right? Like, Ron DeSantis has not raised an army, attacked South Dakota, and declared himself president. Like, it just hasn't really worked like that. So that's one of the things that's not happening. But there are a lot of things I do see that are very similar. If you look at the third century, they're dealing with a major inflation problem. And if you want to look at kind of the inflationary problem and where it comes from, you kind of have to go much further back in time. In 117 AD, under Emperor Trajan, Rome stops expansion, right? It stops expanding because one of the major ways that wealth came in is it would conquer a territory. And initially it would tell those people in those territories, well, now you're going to serve in the Roman army. Mm-hmm. But the policy in the early empire is going to change from the Republic. It was a very Republican policy to bring in these other people and tell them, we just want your soldiers, you can live as normal, whatever. The taxation is really going to start in the empire period. So you would conquer territory, you'd bring in new territory, and those people would now pay taxes to Rome. That's how it's expanded. What starts to happen is in 117, Trajan changes this policy. Then you have not long, the next emperor after him was Hadrian. This is the guy that starts building walls, right? He builds the wall in Britain to keep the Picts out, which are like a northern Scottish tribe that have continually raiding Roman Britain. So he starts the policy of building walls. Mm-hmm. So now there's no new wealth coming into this empire. So for a time, you can deal with that, right? That's kind of one part of things. The expansion stops.
Yeah.
This next thing you're going to see is, for a long period of time, there's a reduction in Romans serving in the Roman army. So they're going to start bringing in barbarians to serve in the Roman army. Initially, this is going to enlarge what's called the Roman auxiliary. The auxiliary was not the standard Roman legions. It was a group that would serve alongside the legions, but they weren't your standard Roman soldier. This person would fight for, it's initially 20 years. It's later going to become 30 years. And after that time, they would get citizenship. What that would mean is they would get citizenship, their wife and children would get citizenship, and anybody born into their family after that time would get citizenship. So if you could manage not to die, things could end up pretty well for you. So you start to have this change in representation of the army, right? Of
Mhm.
who's fighting for Rome. In the 160, I think it's the 160s, the 180s, you're going to have what's called the Antonine Plague. They call it Antonine because it's during the time of, Marcus Aurelius and his family, and they were called the Antonines. You have about 10% of the entire empire dies during that time period. So now you have less of an expanding empire. You have barbarians serving in an army, right? And you have this reduction in actual Romans to serve in the army. So
Mhm.
now you bring in more barbarians to serve in the army. Then you have in 192, Emperor Commodus is going to die. He's the son of Marcus Aurelius, and he was just so hated that it creates this power vacuum for who's going to be the next guy. And you have that year, what's called the year of the five emperors. And the guy that's going to come out of that on top is this guy Septimius Severus. And Septimius Severus is a military commander that becomes emperor, and he's one of the first to actually do this.
Mhm.
And then so this changes how power functions in Rome. So now whoever has the most soldiers is the most powerful man in Rome. So what are you going to do with those soldiers? Give them more money, right?
Mhm.
But what happens, Evan, when you don't have more money?
The
You're going
inflation.
to
Yep.
inflation, right? Because you're going to clip. And this is, I love it because somebody said to me the other day when I was describing this process, that's not inflation. Inflation's when you da da da. And I was like, no, you're talking about what happens in a computer. This is actual how real inflation works. What they would do is they would take the coins and they would clip pieces off of them and use those pieces to make more coins.
Mhm.
It's literally how real
Yep.
inflation actually works. Is the size of the money is reducing, and what would happen later on is they would start adding other base metals to it.
Mhm.
So by 284 AD, you're at 15,000% inflation, right? So you have this giant inflation problem. So now when you look at the third century, as I said, we don't have the problem of military commanders attacking each other.
Mhm.
Though, some of the lefties out there might want to claim January 6th was something like that.
Yep.
The problem, two major problems you have, which the third century did have, and if I'm talking too much, Evan, feel free to shut me up, is you have this inflation problem building up. And you also have this immigration problem building up because what happens is they're serving in the army, but then there's also in the north, there's the barbarian invasions in the north are happening. So it's pushing some barbarian tribes into Rome for safety. So now
Mhm.
you have this massive immigration problem. In 212 AD, Septimius Severus's son, Caracalla, who's shown in the new Gladiator movie in very poor fashion. They did a very poor job showing you what Caracalla would have been like. He was actually a very successful military commander. But anyway, um, he in 212 he takes 30 million people and gives them citizenship overnight that were living in the provinces. Because now what can you do with citizens? You can tax their inheritance. So this
Mhm.
is another attempt to bring in more money, right? Because we don't have money coming in. So now the thing that backfires is in Rome there was these social programs, the main of which was the grain dole, meaning no, they tried to, it wasn't perfect, but they tried to have no one go hungry in the Roman Empire. And they would bring in large amounts of grain from Egypt, and that's how they would feed people. So you have that problem. Now that problem, once again, as I'm talking too much, feel free to shut me up, Evan. But like
Oh, you're good.
the problem they're gonna have then is in the from somewhere around the 220s to the 250s, they start to experience climate change. What do you know? It's not a modern thing. Um, and Egypt starts producing less grain. So grain
Mhm.
prices double, then triple, then quadruple. So now you have this expense of having to pay people that's going up. So inflation is just cranking. Those are the things I see very similar to where we are now. I read something yesterday that before Milei did what he did in Argentina, they were on track for 17,000% inflation, which is
Mhm.
2,000% more than what I denoted here. And he's got the inflation percentage, I believe, down in only 3 months. He got it down to 2% by a lot of the government slashing he did. So if you look at it, those are the two major problems I see.
Mhm.
Inflation is grinding out of control in this country. And we also have this immigration problem of all these people that didn't come here legally and now they're here and now they're getting government support. And the problem you have, Evan, this is exactly how Rome fell.
Mhm.
Rome fell because people came into this territory or this empire to be able to get the goodness of it, right? Like the
Yep.
goodies. As the money disappears, well, those goodies are no longer in existence for them. So they don't need the empire anymore, right? They become the empire. And when you look at the last kind of 100 years of Rome, that's exactly what happens. So for years, for the last year, I've been talking a lot about this. Now, if
Mhm.
you want to look at kind of the Republic side of things, everything that happened with the legal trials of Trump was how the Republic fell, right? Like they're like, Julius Caesar's a bad guy, let's go after him. Julius Caesar's a bad guy, let's go after him. And they push him and push him and push him. So then Julius Caesar finally bites back. He calls their bluff.
Mhm.
And so I think that's quite similar to what happened there. But I think we haven't been a functional republic in a very long time. You know, if you look at 1913 to me as a pivotal year because we really Federal Reserve, income tax, and the 17th Amendment, for me, end a functional republic. And you really have more of a new founder, I would say, in FDR. He created something very different than what the Constitution created. So for me, those are a lot of the similarities I see. I know we can go into other stuff, but I've been talking way too long here. So I will hand the mic back to you, sir.
No, I love that. And I think that's a great overview in the sense. And I agree with you in that we aren't really living in alignment with the actual values of the Republic as it was created. And
Yes.
I look at 1913 as about the same pivot point as well. So you hit the nail on the head there, and I'm in agreement. With the and I know with the immigration thing, right? If we're looking at the United States, for example, I feel like with the immigration, we're seeing a large almost cultural uprooting of a lot of the values, let's say, that is present in American culture, right? There's a very
Sure.
strong American culture, and a lot of people don't, especially when you look at leftist talking points or some of the mainstream ideas. The idea of American culture is very much downplayed and very much, I think we take for granted the actual culture that was this country was built upon, right? That was
Yeah.
existent even in the days of a functional republic.
Well, you look
But I
at what
think
we used to export around the globe, right? We used to
Mhm.
export Michael Jordan, McDonald's, and movies, right?
Mhm.
And now, we've been told, oh, America is such a bad place. Now, the caveat I'll say is we do need to stop invading and using our military against other countries, but at the same time, America is not a very bad place culturally.
Right, exactly. And I think it's actually beautiful to go, as I was saying before the podcast started, I grew up on the East Coast, but now I'm living in South Dakota, and I think the American culture is still very present here in South Dakota
I would
because,
agree with that.
you don't see the whole, I mean, there's still immigration to a sense, but there's the traditional values that this country was built upon. It's still here, right? And with Rome, for example, when you started having all the people flood in, was there a loss of I'd say did the cultural loss of cultural values play a role in the fall of Rome as well? Was that something that was notable in history or notable in their
Y-
fall or something that's
y-
even
Yes and no.
parallel?
Yes and no, because I think a lot of people talk about the debauchery and things like
Mhm.
this at the end of Rome, and it just wasn't true, honestly. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't true, but I think, and it's funny because I'm very conservative and libertarian leaning, but a lot of conservatives like to use that talking point of, it's just like at the end of Rome, people are, I don't know how to describe this, like debauchery is happening and
Right.
gender is uncertain and things like that, and I'm sorry guys, that's actually not true.
Mhm.
By the time Rome falls, it's a Christian empire.
Mhm.
The problem is their original sins, I guess we could say, were committed during the time that they were still a pagan empire, and I think that's the actual problem, right? It's the problems were so bad they couldn't recover from them. So if you want to look at culturally where they were, the actual shift is in spirituality, right? But the damage was already done by the time that happens. Now, the Eastern Empire is going to benefit off that a lot more than the Western Empire does, because the Western Empire really just creates power for what is eventually going to come the papacy. But frankly, these ideas of people talking about debauchery and all these things at the end is just not really true.
Mhm.
It's there in the middle of the third century where when kind of everybody's hair's on fire, but it doesn't. You don't have Christianity had been like a thing in the empire, but like it was like less than 2% of the empire by the time that Constantine um, is going. He doesn't convert till his deathbed, but he starts kind of living as a Christian after the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312. It's not actually going to become a Christian empire until 378 under Theodosius. So you have kind of a lot of time when they're trying to solve certain things that they're done during a pagan viewpoint. If you want to really have some fun, in the new Gladiator movie again, Caracalla is killed by his Praetorian prefect, which is kind of like the leader of the Secret Service,
Hmm.
a guy named Macrinus, who in the movie is portrayed by Denzel Washington. Um, Macrinus lasts about a year, and all of a sudden, this 13-year-old kid comes in off the provinces that they claim is Caracalla's illegitimate son. And his name is going to be Elagabalus. There's lots of other names they use from Heliogabalus, Elagabalus. His birth name would have been Gaius Julius Caesar uh, Marcus Aurelius Antonius. It's like a combination of a whole bunch of different names. But anyway, he's known simply as Elagabalus, and he's the priest of a cult called Elagabal that worship this black rock.
Hmm.
And things get really wild under him because you got to imagine, like, first of all, he's a kid, right? He's 13 years old when a lot of this stuff happens, and he's barely going to make it into his 20s by the time he's going to die. Um, but things get pretty wild, man. He has a marriage ceremony for his black rock, where it gets married to another black rock, and everyone has to come to the wedding. He gets pulled around Rome by a chariot of prostitutes. He marries a Vestal virgin, and later apparently goes trans, and marries a man. He puts his hairdresser in charge of Rome's grain supply, and he does all sorts of weird things with, like, oh, another thing is too, he would advance men in their roles, rather than in the traditional way. Like, so Romans placed a lot of value on tradition, and they would call it the mos maiorum, or the ways of the ancestors. So
Hmm.
rather than doing that, he did it by how long your dong was. He would basically advance you by the length of your member. So like things get really wild in the middle of the third century. But as I mentioned, a little less than 100 years later, it starts to make the moves towards Christianity, right? But the damage is done during this third century, and they kind of don't know how to fix things. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, is actually going to fix things in the East, and I don't know if he intentionally did it or unintentionally does it, but over the period of 30 years, he's going to take them to a gold standard. So by fixing the currency, he actually handles the inflation problem, and the coin he makes called the solidus is actually going to go until about the year 1000 without inflation.
Hmm.
So that is the monetary problem is the major problem, and that is created during this time of upheaval. In the year 249 as well, as this climate change is kind of going on, and they have all these barbarians coming in. The emperor Decius was his name. He actually creates this policy that everyone has to sacrifice to the emperor on his birth, in order to appease the gods and stop climate change. What do you know? It doesn't work. So, like, a lot of these problems happened when it was still a pagan empire, and the damage is already too far done by the time that it culturally makes its Christian conversion.
That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. I think the cultural where I sort of see parallels is, I don't always look to Rome necessarily for like a cultural comparison. I think it's very telling to look at somewhere like the Weimar Republic in Germany in the 20s to kind of get an accurate what's happening in America versus, at least in terms of the cultural things, because, they had their they had opened up the first transgender clinics, and it was, they had prostitutes on it. I was watching a documentary about this the other day. They have prostitutes on every street corner based on your preference. They had a whole corner of
Jeez.
just like cripples who were prostitutes if you wanted a cripple. I don't know if that's a politically correct term nowadays, but so it
We
was.
don't care so much about politically correct around here, Evan.
me,
Like, if you
me
have to
neither.
think about what you mean, then we got a problem here, man.
No, I
Like
agree
like
with
I
you.
said the other day, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, why can't I just say that's retarded? Because I always used to be able
Yeah.
to say that was retarded, and it was kind of funny. And now it's like you have to have the proper term for everything, or someone out there is offended. It's like, come on, guys, grow a thicker skin. But I think that that's important too, because it goes back to the inflation problem, right?
Hmm.
If you look at the problems of empires, right, all these other things are symptoms.
Yeah.
The actual major problem is always economics.
Yeah.
It's always economics. When they get over their skis with spending, or they try to find some way to handle things, right? For the Weimar Republic, it was paying the money to France from the was it the Treaty of Paris that ended World War One, or the Treaty of
Treaty of Versailles. Yeah.
Versailles? There we go. I can never get the two straight. But so the Treaty of Versailles, and they inflate their money in order to, like, be able to pay this debt off, and it,
Hmm.
it kind of ruins things. So, but it always comes down to a monetary problem, and if you're not handling economics, it will kill a country faster than anything else. But when you kind of get in this downward spiral, people get sucked into all those other things because they're much easier to confront than what do we do about our money.
Right, exactly. And I think sometimes the cultural emphasis, especially when we're looking at America today, I mean, it's very easy to point out cultural degeneracy and label it as the issue, right? And certainly,
Sure.
for me, the solution in terms of all the cultural stuff is not participating in it, right? Just being like, oh, it is what, I'm going to let people do as they want, but I'm going to focus on, let's focus on like the economics. Let's focus on the root of the issue. And I think you're right in that it is more of a symptom of a much larger issue.
Correct.
And
And that's not to say
yeah,
those things don't matter, right? Like I
right.
am concerned about like what they're teaching in schools right now and
Mhm.
how so for some reason people forgot what boys are and girls are, which is kind of like one of the most basic things we know.
Right.
Like I think those things are important, but I think unless we handle the currency, like time is short to be able to actually care about these things.
Right, exactly. And when we're looking at, so obviously we just had the election with Trump being elected and everything. Where do you see? Obviously, we'd love to end the Federal Reserve and kind of back the currency, maybe back a gold standard. But we're seeing the emergence of things like crypto, for example. Bitcoin is, I might hit 100,000 today. It's looking pretty close, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
I mean, I think it's at 99,000 right now, and everybody on Twitter or X is talking, oh, it's going to hit 100,000, going to hit 100,000, right? So we're seeing these sort of alternative currencies emerge in the as a potential solution for the inflation problem here in with our standard dollar, because obviously it's not backed by anything. Federal Reserve is a farce. But where do you see, like, if we can look back to, let's say, the Roman Empire and kind of gain some perspective and lessons on how our government could actually approach the inflation issue, what would you say kind of the things that would need to happen now, and what do you think, with Trump coming into office, do you actually see the inflation issue being managed or being something that is put to the forefront?
So here's the problem. I guess to kind of say this simply, like Rome fell. You know what I mean? Like they tried to confront this problem in various ways, and in at least in the West, they didn't do a very good job, right? Like they
Hmm.
didn't handle that thing. If you want to look at the major attempt to actually do something about it, is from 284 to I think 305 is Emperor Diocletian,
Hmm.
and he was a military commander and a soldier that becomes emperor. So he approaches the problems like a soldier would do it with force, right? So what does he do? He tries to put in price controls. Well, we've seen that doesn't work, right? Because it creates a great black market and it also drives inflation harder. What else does he try to do? He tries to bring in a new currency, but then people are like, I still don't trust your new currency because I still have gold. So then they start hoarding gold, right? So like you have that problem. Then what does he do? Well, I know what the problem is. Let's just tax them more. That really doesn't work all that well either, right? Because then once again, that drives the black market harder because people don't want to report their income. So Diocletian does try to solve a lot of these problems. And the other thing he does as well is by this point, the empire is just too big for one person to rule. You have to think about it. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have a lot of these, communication wouldn't take days. It would take months. And the emperors in the middle to the end of the third century, they spend their entire career just crossing the borders and trying to keep people out of their territory, right? Like if you look at Aurelian, who was the emperor in the 270s, he's this guy that kind of like puts the Eastern and Western Roman Empire back together because it had started to kind of in the third century fall apart. He's going from here to there to here to there to put this thing back together, and they call him the Restutor Orbum, or the restorer of the world. So he kind of puts the Roman world back together, but then like his entire career, he's just fighting people, and then eventually he's just killed, right? So then
Hmm.
it's by one of his own men, sad as that is. So you really, as an emperor, were trying to protect your position in this period. So Diocletian tries to, by force, kind of restore the empire in a different way, and he breaks it up into East and West. So he creates now, we don't just have one emperor, we have two.
Hmm.
And you know what? We later on we don't just have two, we have four. He's going to create what's called the Tetrarchy, or the rule by four. So you have two senior emperors known as Augusti and two junior emperors, which are known as Caesars. And this isn't going to work real well. It's actually going to lead to the empire splitting apart. That split is going to be finalized by the rule of Theodosius in 378. but you're going to have a lot of the money and wealth and things start to go east, right? And that's one of the reasons that the West crumbles is, number one, the West is getting invaded more by barbarians, so you're having that problem. But then you're also having the East has the richer tax bases, which is Egypt and Babylon and a lot of those areas. That's all part of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Mhm.
And you have a lot of what Constantine does is very smart by getting them back on a gold standard. So I think if you want to look at building something that works better, you have to kind of look at the Byzantine Empire. Here's the problem, though, Evan. The problem is the Byzantine Empire really is kind of the model for medieval monarchy.
Mhm.
So you know what I mean? Like, so it's like there kind of is no model on how do you restore a republic, right? Or how do you restore, a constitutional representative republic, like America is, because no one's actually done it before. So
Mhm.
I think we kind of are in a little bit of uncharted territory here. And I think the thing that's interesting is we've seen a lot of the cultural shifts just since election day. Like it's kind of like somebody brought 1990 back. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
But I think the part about it that it's important is if we don't fix economic policy, we can't fix anything. So what has to happen when we're looking at that? Well, we have to get energy policy back, right? We have to start producing gas and oil and everything here in quantities that we become energy independent again, which we were under the Trump administration. We need to bring industry back here, right? Because we can't have a strong dollar if we're outsourcing our industry to countries like China, who number one don't respect our contracts either. Like there's
Mhm.
people that'll bring their business to China. Next thing you know, China's ripped it off, and that company doesn't have a business anymore because they don't agree with those things. So you have to bring industry back here. And I think after those things, you can take a look at fixing the currency. But if you don't bring industry back, if you don't look at energy independence, you can't fix things. Do you get what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
because our currency is based so much on oil and so much on people trading in it that the dollar has to have some sort of real value, and that has to be based on the American economy. So unless we fix those things, we're in trouble.
Right, definitely. And I think we still very much, even though obviously we don't have a expansionist government in the sense where we're going and conquering new territories, but the way in which the military industrial complex plays its
And
role.
in some ways, we are.
Right, I was gonna
We
say.
shouldn't be, but in some ways, we are.
If anything, I do still think we take sort of an expansionist model in where in the past that it helped grow the country into what it is. But if we're still too reliant upon that expansionist model, we're sending all of our money overseas and we're setting up new military bases, engaging in different conflicts, whether it's sending money to Ukraine or Israel or all the, bases all over the world. That's billions and billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, that's being
Yes.
just spent
Well,
that
you even
could,
you even you even look at what we're doing in Ukraine right now, and it's like we're continually like people forget about the Maidan coup in 2014 that our State Department most likely created because they wanted to create an anti-Putin government, which they did, and then
Mhm.
Putin's like, "Don't expand NATO," and we're like, "We're going to expand NATO," and he's like,
Yeah.
"Don't expand NATO," and we're like, "We're going to expand NATO," and you kind of keep poking the Russian bear and hoping it doesn't bite you, and now we're just pouring in more money and more money and more money and we're pushing everyone into global conflict. So I think it's a little bit. We need to roll back our international policy, man. We need to start worrying about what's happening here in our own currency, or we're not just going to destroy ourselves. We're going to destroy everyone.
Right, exactly. And I not to take black pills or be a doomer. I don't necessarily see the United States rolling back its military
Well, you look
policy.
what's happened since the election. And they're like, all right, well, Trump won. Let's make the fire so big he can't put it out. It's like,
Mhm.
wait, what? Why, how is that the solution? You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. It's like if we can't win, we're gonna make sure nobody wins. That's
Exactly.
it's kind of appearing to be the mindset at the very least, which it's kind of scary that people would rather have that outcome than actually all right, this guy won. Let's put our differences aside and try and build a functional republic, a functional country where we can actually, maybe all do well. Even if this isn't our chosen person and we don't agree with him for X, Y, and Z, the fact that people would, I don't know if it's just too prideful to to take on to accept that he won. I don't know, but yeah, especially the military operations that are taking place. I mean, you could look at what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia and all that and say we're on the brink of a World War III based on, if they start, if,
Even what Putin's saying at this point, like he made a speech yesterday talking about, recompense for global actors. It's like we're one of those. You know what I mean? And I think
Mhm.
that's the thing we have to consider. But I'll tell you what, Evan. Here's the thing I'm hopeful for. Right?
Yep.
I wanna take you in the way back machine. Doo-doo-doo-doo.
Okay.
That's the sound of going way back. We're in 2020, and what was the problem then? We couldn't talk about anything. We couldn't get the word out. We couldn't talk about what's happening. You know what I mean? And if you look at what's changed, Musk buying X is a big part of that because there's now this ability to talk. But also, you look at in the last week, MSNBC is up for sale,
Mhm.
CNBC is up for sale, CNN is up for sale. Legacy media is dying and falling away. It's the ability to have conversations like you and I are having right now on podcasts, right? Like people that are real people are able to have these conversations, get out there and kind of take control of the narrative. So I think that's the thing that actually makes me really hopeful is this ability to have freedom of speech to actually talk about these things. Because if you go back in the Wayback Machine a little bit further to 9/11, right?
Mhm.
It's like, we were the Twin Towers happened and we're gonna go bomb Iraq. And it's like, wait, what? Why are we gonna do that?
Right.
So you know what I mean? Like it's like we invade Afghanistan, and then we invade Iraq, and then we do these different things that really don't really handle what happened with 9/11 because a lot of their funding came from the Saudis anyway. That were like, hey, you know what? We'll just keep taking your oil. It's fine. Take our money. So like, I think that's the thing that we have to take a look at is could you imagine if during that time post 9/11, if people were talking like they're talking now,
Mm.
like, dude, there's a good chance we don't invade Afghanistan, we don't invade Iraq, and the Bush administration starts getting looked into. Like, dude, could you imagine? So I think where we are in history right now is pivotal, and I think we have kind of this one shot to shift the tide because on podcasts and in places like that we can have these conversations.
Right. Definitely. If anything, the pow because of being in the information age, there's more of like a power that's actually in the people's hands. Because a Joe Rogan, for example, gets more viewers than CNN, right? So the guests he's having on his show, which are going, for example, they're gonna persuade public opinion more so than Don Lemon, or well, I guess he's not on CNN anymore, but that type of figurehead, right? So I definitely agree with you, and I think it's an interesting cultural phenomenon that's never
Yeah.
really existed previously to where
It hasn't, because if you look at even in Rome, right, like, the emperor totally controlled what was said,
Mhm.
right? Like even look at a lot of the cultural things that there's kind of the most famous period in Rome, right, which is kind of the Augustan time, the first emperor,
Mhm.
and a lot of the famous Roman works that we know of come out of that era, the Aeneid, the histories of Livy, the writings of Ovid and things like that, because the emperor was paying for and pushing a lot of these things, and there wasn't an ability to talk out against your emperor because you were dead, right?
Mhm.
Like there was this idea of proscribing people or putting their names out and putting them to death. So that doesn't really happen here. And now we have the ability to talk, discuss, and get to better ideas and actually get the information out on what's happening. So I'm very hopeful from that perspective.
Right. And I do think that is going to shape sort of future public discussion, public opinion, and actual policy as we actually move forward. Um, I do want one of the things that I look at is I still think there is a centralization of power
I
that
agree.
is going to that's still there, and I almost wonder as we move forward through, because we're very much, I would almost view similar to how, like, when, let's say, Henry Ford built the assembly line, we have this industrial revolution. I look at it in the sense of where we are technologically. I think we're kind of entering into a technological revolution to where the technologies we have 10 years from now, for example, are probably almost incomprehensible to where we can't even predict it, right? It's gonna the rate of advancement in technology is going to continue to grow. So I wonder, as we have this technological advancement, if the same centralization of power, and we still have these deep state operatives people, and kind of an oligarchy that is in place behind the scenes, right? I mean, who are the people who obviously from 2016 to 2020, actively would work against Trump while he was in office, right? He talked about draining the swamp.
Yeah,
Was he successful? Well,
I wouldn't say so.
probably not, right? So, and even now going in, okay, again, does he have the ability to drain that swamp? Maybe. I'm
Well,
not.
but
I'm.
and even this, like I think the thing you have to look at too is even as much as I like and support Trump,
Mhm.
there's also been a lot more of a centralization of power under him, right? Like
Right.
if you look at over the last 100 years, the presidency has become an imperial position, right? We're supposed to have three co-equal branches of government,
Yep.
but most of the power has flown to the presidency, right? Like we have presidents ruling by executive order. That was never meant to be the case. And I
Mm.
think that's the actual problem we're having is so much power has been funneled to the executive branch that it now has more power than the judiciary. It now has more power than the lawmaking branch. You know what I mean? And this is the problem that you see here: is it's no longer three co-equal branches of government. It's really one controlling the other two. And I think that that the legislative and the judiciary really, in a lot of ways, are actually run by the presidency. Though I think we just saw some interestingness with what happened with Matt Gaetz for
Hmm.
the legislative to kind of put its foot down again. This is the problem we've seen no matter who's been president for the last 100 years, is we've seen this centralizing of power in the individual, the president.
Right. Well, and I think that kind of plays into what you were talking about, almost shifting away from a republic and more into an actual empire, because that is how an empire would function, right? Where you have a figurehead.
Well, an empire really it really refers to the territorial aspects of
Okay.
something. You know what I mean? But when you're looking at it, it is more kind of a monarchy in terms of its model, but we didn't call it a monarchy, you know what I mean? In terms of
Yeah.
how Rome functed.
I was gonna say, well, I've seen a few people say, "Oh yeah, Trump is our king now," and it's like, well, I don't, I don't know if I would want to say that, but it does show the almost symbolic nature now
Well,
of the
that's where
presidency.
Milo Yiannopoulos put something out the other day on X, and he just wrote the words "pater patriae," and "pater patriae" was a title in Rome that Augustus was the first one to take it, and it was Father of the Nation. And
Hmm.
it's like because if you look at it, like Trump has really started to become this mythical character in a lot of ways, right? Like where he is what represents America right now on the world stage, and to me, that's one of the negatives, right? I think there's a lot of positives with the populism and things like that, but at the same time we do have the ability of this point in time of where we are right now to shift too far one way.
Hmm. Right, exactly. And I almost wonder if we continue to shift in this direction, let's say where the presidency is strengthened, there is further a centralization of power. I think the United States, for example, and I would love to hear your take on this because I think it could still exist as a um, almost a pseudo republic in a lot of ways. And I think we started to see the foundations of this where we talk about being built upon this foundation of a republic and have all these different branches of government, but to where we do sort of become this, we have the president, and he is the not the ultimate ruler, but the Senate and the House and the judiciary, they all kind of support his ways. And we're in this almost like post-republic era where we are kind of moving more towards a monarchy type of structure, or I don't want to say dictator necessarily type of structure because
Sure.
that implies a whole other level of tyranny. Um, and to me, it's like, okay, so the United States as a republic maybe no longer ceases to exist, and maybe that's because of, let's say, 1913, and because of the actual legislation and what we've built upon for the last 100 years, there's no necessarily reverting all the way back to that because the people themselves have come to accept this sort of form of rule, right? And so, maybe we don't live under democracy. We don't live under a republic. Well, we never really have lived under democracy. That is not
Yeah.
they use that word incorrectly. But now this is sort of our new form of government that can exert its influence and its power through more of a monarchy structure, right? And maybe that's what
Well,
we're moving into.
and I think that's why the first, they always talk about the first 100 days of a presidency and what they've done. But I think when you look at kind of the first 100 days of a Trump administration, starting in January, I think this is pretty pivotal. You're going to see in those first 100 days does what he does bringing us closer to the Constitution or further from the Constitution? So if we start slashing parts of government, if we start restoring civil liberties and start doing things like that, then I'm very hopeful for bringing us back to something. Can we go all the way back? No, I don't think so, because we still, unless they're going to get rid of the Federal Reserve, unless they're, going to let state legislatures pick, senators again, because we kind of have two Congresses right now, which really makes no sense.
Mhm.
Or unless they, let us mint our own money, and they make us stop paying taxes for the ability for someone else to go use our money, which is insane. So unless we start to handle those things, we can't go all the way back.
Mm.
Now, Trump has floated a few ideas that I like. He's floated the idea of, let's get rid of income tax and make tariffs. Well, hey, I would love that. It would require a constitutional amendment, but I love that.
Mhm.
So this first 100 days and the things that get in motion is going to tell us a lot. And it's going to look at, are we restoring the Constitution or are we pushing towards something else?
Right, exactly. And I think it is pivotal to just sit and observe and notice and not, especially it's very easy when, let's say, you support a candidate. And I've seen this, um, on both sides. I know you have too, where it's like we can kind of, it's like, oh, uh, maybe Trump does something to where he's floating more towards a empire, no, I'd say a monarchy structure to where we are bypassing the Constitution. I mean, I think maybe 2020 is a good example of this, to where
Yeah.
the whole country was shut down, and everybody.
Well, and then he was like having BlackRock running things for the Treasury. It's like, dude, are you on crack? What are you doing?
Right, exactly. So we can't necessarily be afraid to call him out just because he is
Yes,
this mythic figure that is supposed to save the republic, and
correct.
it's very easy to kind of play a game of oh, but he's just doing it for this reason, or he'll do that later. And I don't necessarily buy into any of
Well,
those
I
excuses.
think that's been the problem with the whole and I apologize to all the people out there that I'm going to offend. But it's why I kind of think the whole Q thing was bullshit.
Hmm.
Because if you look at the what led up to the Bolshevik Revolution, it's very similar to make telling people everything's going to be okay. Somebody else is going to
Hmm.
handle it, because what you're trying to do is put people in a position where they have no agency and they feel like they can't do anything about a situation.
Yep.
So I think the thing that's important to remember here is that we all have agency. We all have an ability to affect this outcome in this situation, whether that is getting involved in our school boards, whether it is holding our politicians accountable, whatever it is. But I think to say it's totally cool because we got our guy in there and he's just going to handle it. Well, that takes no responsibility for the outcome. And I think that's the thing you have to really be worried about right now, is people thinking that the fight is over. Like I actually think Pam Bondi is a better pick than Matt Gaetz, frankly, for Attorney General. I like her a lot, but I think if you look at even what happened there, um, that's just proof to you of what can go down. Like, sure, Trump picks his Attorney General, and the Senate says nope, because they do
Hmm.
what they always did. So I think, once again, so what do you have to do? We need to primary those people. They don't deserve to have jobs because they have not gone by the will of the people. And the will of the people was to have Matt Gaetz. I think Pam Bondi's their pick, like I said. But anyway, it just shows you that there is no honeymoon here, guys. Like, it is
Hmm.
us holding our elected officials accountable and not just letting them continue more of the same.
Right, and they work for us in a sense, right? And people seem to forget that. Um, let's say we're looking in the future here, and I know you said, newsflash, Rome did fall, right? So if we're if we're looking at America, and let's say the American Republic ceases to come to or return to what it was built upon, and whether it's a direct, like, there is no more United States of America, or it's sort of operating in the sense of what we were already talking about. Despite the fall of the Roman Empire, um, the actual force of the Roman Empire, right? I've heard you talk a little bit about this. Maybe you could elaborate on it. That power didn't necessarily cease to exist, and that influence that it had is still very monumental in culture, right? So, if we're looking at, let's say, the American Republic, if it were to, in theory, fall, and not to be blackpilling people by any means, uh, what would that, I guess, after effect look like in a transition, in like a post America world? Like, what kind of impact would that have on in the future, and how we sort of take parts of the, I guess, American Republic and learn from it and integrate it, right? Because when
Mhm.
when the Roman Empire fell, I mean, you could argue that the power went into somewhere like the Vatican, right? Or its
Yeah.
influence is still felt in other areas. I mean, is there a like a parallel to that in today's society, or is there what do you see in
So I
that?
think the tough part is like, and this is why it's hard to predict the future, is like a system has to come out of that. I think that's the thing you have to look at is
Hmm.
because then if you look at, the Germans used to call it the Third Reich, which means, Third Kingdom, right?
Hmm.
Reich just means kingdom, and people hear that word and they're like, oh my God, they're terrified. And it's the German word that means kingdom. And if you look at it, they looked at, the Holy Roman Empire as, the first kingdom. They looked at and not the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. There's a distinction here. They looked at the German Empire as the second empire, and then they looked at the what they thought was going to be the Third Reich is kind of where it was going from there. So if you want to look at the idea of like empire and where it goes, um, it's important to understand that they'll take the idea and build something new on it, right? Like the Holy Roman Empire. The reason I brought this up was the Holy Roman Empire. It was not a Roman Empire at all, right? They just
Hmm.
kind of like call this guy Emperor of the Romans, and and what ends up happening is he's given this title, but he's not actually, Charlemagne is not a Roman emperor, right? He's
Hmm.
not. And if the Eastern Roman Empire is still going at this point, and they would have been like, King of the Romans? What is this guy? What is he doing here? So it's kind of very confusing to the Byzantines.
Hmm.
So they tend to take these things and use them to make new things more acceptable. So I think that's what you have to look at it as is what is the new system that comes out of this if it does fall? And how do they try to use this old system to make you feel good about it, right? And I think that's what you have to really consider. So I think it's too hard to predict the future and say, what is that system? Because
Hmm.
I think as well, it's going to be something like we've never seen before if it does go the wrong way, because we've never had technology like this. Um, as much as I like Elon Musk, the Neuralink terrifies me. So like
Hmm.
I think where we're headed for is something we've never seen before unless we can restore some of what the Republic was. I don't know that we can ever restore all of it because too much has changed. Too much changed after the Civil War, too much changed after 1913, and too much changed through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But I think if we can, like, let's say if we can get back to like 1990, I think we're in pretty good shape. I think we
Hmm.
have something for a little bit for a pretty decent, pretty successful America. But if it does go the other way, I feel like they will use kind of this facade of like, this idea of like Captain America to bring in whatever the next thing is and make you accept it.
Hmm. Definitely. And
I apologize for the long-winded explanation there.
no, definitely. And I think that's a good way to put it because I've very much looked at, I want to look into this question as well in the sense, and I mentioned technology earlier and you just brought it up too. I kind of look at like, let's say China today, right? Where they have
China.
China, put him in the Trump voice. You look at China today, I always view the in a perfect world for the people behind the scenes, let's say the deep state, or the people who are
Sure.
ushering in, putting in policy that kind of brings about the fall of the American Republic, right? I always kind of look at it like their view of America tomorrow is what China is today, right? In the sense where you have sort of more of a centralization of power. And maybe you can do this on what you just mentioned, the facade of this great American, like, oh, we have the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, we're America, right? But you sneak in, let's say, digital surveillance technology or social credit scores, and you start incorporating
Or if you
tech.
go into a court case, they're like, I know we have this Constitution thing, but we have this other thing, and it's much
Hmm.
better.
Right, exactly. And we've already seen that where it's like, well, the Patriot Act takes precedent over the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
So, or
Which,
if,
by the way, if you've never read the book, it's an old book now, but it's by Glenn Greenwald. It's called How Would a Patriot Act, and it breaks down the Patriot Act. It's super, super interesting. Anyway,
Mhm.
continue.
But right, and it's a perfect example to where, we look at countries outsourcing health laws to the World Health Organization, right? To where
Yeah.
in the time of a pandemic, the World Health Organization takes precedent. Constitution, nah, don't worry about it. We need to act on the greater sovereign or the greater good of the people, right? So
Yeah.
my thinking is, and I've been doing a lot of podcasts on this AI topic and this technological, I'd say almost a technocracy is kind of I'd say ideal outcome for the the powers at be who are not interested in a republic. I think that sort of technocracy is sort of what we're moving into. And as technology influence, you mentioned Neuralink. Eventually, I personally think that the brain implants and the cognitive implants are going to be as common as smartphones 20, 30 years from now, just based on
Kind of
the
terrifying though, man. Like
it
you know what I
is.
mean?
Right. Well, it's like, oh, but it's sold under the guise of efficiency. And what is America built upon? And this is the one thing. And I love the idea of the Department of Government Efficiency, for example, right? Where you slash, let's, I'm a teacher coming from the idea, let's get rid of the Department of Education. Let's get rid of a lot of these departments, right? But it's like, if you make the government to operate like a machine, well, you need people to operate like a machine, right? And us operate as almost a automaton within the system, right? So it's very there's some good things that I see on the ideas of efficiency from, let's say, like an Elon Musk and Trump and all of them, but it's like, well, is it playing into this over here where you might need a system of efficiency for technocracy? And I don't know.
Yeah.
But so to me, that's a very you got to at least watch
Well, it
and
could be good and
parallel.
bad, right? Like I would love to cut a whole bunch of government agencies, but it's like, do we really need another government agency? That's how we got Homeland Security. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's like and now it's like this big behemoth that they're gonna let what's her name run there, which kind of also concerns me as well. The killing dogs lady. What the hell's her name?
Oh, that's my governor, Christy Nome. Yep.
Oh, Christy Nome. She's good and she's bad, right? You
Yep.
like, you know what I mean? I feel like she's like kind of like a fake cowboy in some ways.
Yeah, very much
So anyway,
very much so. Well, it's interesting because even here, the people in South Dakota, even the Republicans, most people here are Republican, but most people that you talk to, if you're to come to South Dakota, a lot of them actually have a kind of a negative opinion of Kristi Noem because there's been a few laws that the people have passed on the
yeah.
ballot as initiatives to where she decided, no, we're not actually going to do that, and actually just overruled the will of the people. Well, that it was a voted measures. She's like, no, we're going to find some here's a technicality, here's another technicality. We're not doing those. And
But I
so,
think the problem is people have they have this false idea that being a Republican is good,
mhm,
and it's not necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad either, right? I think like the left right paradigm itself is a trap,
mhm,
because you look at all the stuff we got because of a Republican under the George W. Bush administration, right? Like one of my favorite writers, this guy named Jim Mars. He passed on a number of years ago, but he used to call George Bush a post turtle because he said when you live in Texas, people would as a prank they'd put turtles up on the top of fence posts, and you're like, that creature didn't get there on its own. You just want to help it down. And he's
mhm.
like, Bush is the same way. Like, how the hell did this guy get there? Well, he was convenient because they could pass a lot of things. So I think to just say at the same time that being a Republican is the right thing isn't correct here either. I mean, it's accountability for whoever's in there.
Right, exactly. Kind of going beyond the party lines to actually um, do what people feel is right. And it's interesting because you can witness that. And, let's say there was a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who would go and vote for Trump, right? But it wasn't necessarily based on even policy, but it was on the idea of populism, right? Because to the left, Bernie Sanders represented, I'm a populist candidate, and Trump comes along, I'm a populist candidate. I don't represent the uniparty interests, right? And so,
Well, and populism is interesting, right? Because it could be a very good thing, right? That could be a
mhm,
very good thing, but it can also be a very bad thing. Because if you look at the last 100 years of the Roman Republic, right? We're not an empire yet, we're the Republic. So 133 to 31 is what's known as the Roman Revolution. But what ends up happening is these very intelligent men use populism to give themselves more power. The first of which are these two brothers, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus. They managed to use the needs of the people of getting them more land and handling their poverty to almost make themselves monarchs.
mhm,
And then both are assassinated, right? So then not long after that, you have another guy, Marius, who gives voting rights to the Italians and citizenship to the Italians. And he's very much a populist. But what does he do? He's the first person to break Roman law. You're only supposed to hold a consulship once every 10 years. He holds 7 of them, right?
mhm.
So it's like populism can be a very good thing. It actually really does empower the people. It's important. But I think it's also important to understand that people with bad intentions can use populism to give themselves more power.
Absolutely, and kind of play on the the desire of of the people to have somebody who is claiming to represent them, and you kind of tap into that emotion and that energy, right? And I think that's why Trump was so successful in 2016, because he was able to really harness that. And you could say, was he a true populist or not? I mean, that's up for debate. I would say 2016, his candidate, his the way it turned out, probably wasn't that much of a populist candidate, but he was elected on the promise of populism, right? On the idea of populism. And I think that's why he still continues to be successful, because he's viewed as the outsider. He's viewed
Yeah.
as this person who's coming to represent the people. And for me, with the way this system is so designed and shuts down opposition in such a ruthless manner, oftentimes, I question anybody who makes it to the very top level, if they're a true populist or not. Uh, I don't know if
Well,
it's I
and
don't know
I
if it's
think
possible.
the interesting thing about Trump is that he is a total outsider. And
Hmm.
so I think that's the one thing he's got going for him is even the people in the political classes, you look at even the way the standard Republican Party treats him,
Yeah,
that's a good indicator. The
yeah,
fact that everyone together uniquely hates him is good for regular people. So I think to me, this is really a time when populism does have the chance to fix things because I think that they would they would love him if he was using populism to further their own means.
that's true. That's true. It would have been embraced from the start. All you got to do is watch this 2016 debate between all the Republican primary candidates. You can see how they, somebody like a Lindsey Graham is a perfect example of
Uh,
the, yeah, no, my same,
Lady Lindsay.
yeah, my same reaction to him, and how his dialogue shifted before he was the nominee.
Lindsey Graham has never met a bomb he didn't like.
That's exactly right. Same with a lot of the other Republicans. You could say Mitch McConnell, but he's on the way out, thankfully.
Who's the other one there? The fake Indian.
Oh,
Oh no, I'm sorry. The reverse fake Indian. Like she's actually Indian, but she's claiming she's not.
Elizabeth Warren.
No, not Native American. The other one
Oh,
there.
um,
The Republican version. Nikki Haley. There we
Nikki
go.
Haley. Okay, Nikki Haley. Yep, I was gonna say. Yeah. So the establishment is very entrenched with them both, but I agree with you in that. I think populism, to me, I think it's the only way forward. I'm curious to see 4 years from now, 8 years from now, what if that energy still kind of manifests itself, and
Mm.
to, let's say, if outsiders continue to sort of come in and reshape the actual republic, or if that's just sort of, let's say, the Republican Party, for example, shifts its entire actual platform to more align with that populist energy and that sort of mentality for political purposes. I think it's very possible.
I
Uh,
still think, and this is what I expected to happen, and it hadn't happened yet.
mhm.
I still think there's a political party splitting that could happen
Hmm.
because what's happened is this Republican Party has become this really big tent,
Yep.
and your neocons are still there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think, but your modern Republican isn't really a Republican. I think that's the issue if you're looking at, right? Like you look at even a lot of the Democrats that have come to the Republican side because what's happened is the whole Overton window of the political spectrum is continually moving left. It's
Yeah.
just what's happening. So you're having kind of this left that's left people behind, but then even the conservative movement has went so left, it's started to leave normal people behind. So I do think there is another kind of political split coming. I just frankly, I expected it to happen with this election because I thought they were really just not going to let Trump be the candidate
Hmm.
on the Republican side. So I think there's still something else coming because this tent is getting really big, and I don't know that the ideas work for everyone because if it were me, kick the neocons out, but I think the neocons still control a lot of the party.
Right. And you could say that there's even a few neocons already put in Trump's cabinet. I mean, you could look at
Marco
somebody,
Rubio for
Marco.
one.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could look at Marco Rubio as
But I
the
keep seeing
clear.
these picks, and I'm like, ooh, like that one, like this one, like that one. Oh, Marco Rubio. Oh,
Oh,
bad pick.
oh, that one hurts. Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly.
Well, and it's a big post too, as Secretary of State. Like he can do a lot of bad things in that post.
Well, and that, that's direct involvement with the other countries, and kind of leads a lot of the foreign policy. So it kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, where America, in theory, should reduce a lot of its foreign policy and foreign conflicts. But you put somebody like Marco Rubio in that post, the American empire is going to probably only continue to expand its reigns outward. And I heard an interesting theory. I don't remember who first said this to me, but a lot of times if you look at empires, and I'd be curious if this applies to Rome as well, because I don't necessarily know the answer, where if you have an empire and it can only expand so far outward, by the time it reaches sort of its expansion point, it starts to sort of turn back inward and devour itself. And it almost becomes cannibalistic in its nature, right? And I
Yeah.
think in terms of America, maybe that's where we're at, to where we've pretty much got our sphere of influence as far as you can get it, right?
Hmm.
In terms of what we're capable of, and now it's starting in order to continually feed that war. The military industrial complex is coming back inward, and it's cannibalizing in a lot of ways, right? And I think there's some truth to that if you look at how we're going about foreign policy and how we treat people in this country, right? And the policies that are taking place, you could say that that's a very real phenomenon. Is that something that took place in Rome? Is that a
Well, if you want to look at, as I was talking about earlier, like the policies changed dramatically in 117 under Trajan, and that's
mm,
where the expansion policies changed. So what happens is things go more towards taxation, right? Things,
yep.
and it's very similar to what we've done here, right? Like, so taxation comes in harder. And I
Yep.
think that's what starts to happen is you start degrading the people that are producing in your society, and that's when the society starts to crumble. Like I think Atlas Shrugged was kind of less of a kind of warning and more of a prediction of your future, right? Like, eventually producers don't want to be a part of a society like that because they don't want to produce for someone else. So
Mm,
I think that's what you're correct. That's what ends up happening. It's kind of the cycle of empire, right? It expands, it expands, it expands. It can't expand any further, so they try to preserve what they have, but then you can't preserve what you have. So what you do, you start kind of taking away from your citizens, and you start taxing your citizens and taking away their freedom and their liberty and things to handle this. And at the end, you have nothing else, so you try to bring in other people to try to help handle your empire. And then what do you know? They kind of want to take glory off the what's left of empire, and you don't have an empire left. It's a very similar sequence. You look at what happened in imperial China. You look at what happened in uh, you know. Uh, the in Central Europe and during the medieval era. You look at what happened even during the late years of the papacy's power when the Pope had an army and things like that. It all goes very similarly, man. It really does.
right. I was gonna say that's the old saying, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think we can see the direct results of that, and people can kind of get a glimpse. Well, what does the future hold if we're continuing this way? Well, there's the path, and like you said earlier, it's tough to predict the future, but it's kind of in the same sense, you can kind of know what the end result is going to be if we don't actually begin to change our ways. And I mean, do you have a thought on, do you think these next 4 years are going to kind of determine the actual direction of whether the Republic stands or not? Because to me, I very much,
I think 4 years is too long, man. I
yeah.
think your first 100 days is big, but it's your first 14 months.
Hmm.
Because what happens after 14 months? Well, everybody's campaigning to get elected next time. So I,
Mhm.
I think I think it's not even the next 4 years as much as it's the next the first 100 days and the next 14 months. Because after that, everybody's trying to get reelected.
Right. So this is the make or break time,
It is.
essentially. And I definitely agree with you, because I think if we
Well, you got
get,
to think about it because Trump gets in, he has a Republican House, he has a Republican Senate,
yep,
um, and if he gets the right cabinet in, this is his time because then you have to worry about midterms and everything else, right? Like he can lose the Senate, he can lose the House. I once again I don't know how many seats are up for election, so I don't know if it's enough to shift it either way. But like at the same time, this is vital. It really is because even like it depends on you look at Speaker Mike Johnson. I think he's a joke. We need a new speaker. So that even that could be a barrier to Trump getting his what he wants to get done.
right, exactly. We'd love to see like a Thomas Macy or something. Thomas
I
Ma
don't think I don't think so. I think Massey would actually be better in agriculture because then
Mm,
I can like drink raw milk and stuff and not feel bad
right,
about it.
100%. Oh, you speaking my language over here. Yep, that's exactly it. Legal. Put raw milk back in the grocery stores. If we really want to make America healthy again. Thankfully, I'm out here in farm country, so it's not too
I can
difficult.
too, man. Like you can get it out here. They just what they'll do is they put a label on it that says not for human consumption, but they still sell it for human consumption, obviously.
Yep, I was gonna I was gonna say there's the legal loopholes on that. So, but I definitely agree with you. I think him in agriculture would be good. But
We do need somebody else then as Speaker of the House, though, because the problem is Trump cannot, you can't be tripping over your own people to get the job done, or you're getting nothing done.
Right. No, I agree with you. And I guess that really puts it into perspective that this is the make or break point because I think if we let another presidency, let's say, because ideally the Republican Party is about building the republic, about preserving the foundation. And if they're not actually going to do that now, when would they ever do it? Right? Because it
Yeah.
is kind of I guess this is the golden opportunity in a lot of ways. So, um, but awesome, Jeremy. We're running close to about an hour and a half here. So this has been a fun conversation, man. I
It,
feel like
it flew by, man.
I
There's a lot of
know.
different directions we went with this.
I was gonna say I feel like we could easily keep chatting for hours about it. And we'll have to plan another conversation in the near future after maybe
Yeah.
it's 100-day mark and kind of evaluate where we're at,
That might not be a bad idea. I'll take you up on that, man.
for sure. But where would you got any projects coming up you want to share,
Yeah.
or where would you send sort of the listeners further engage with your work and kind of continue this deep dive if they want to learn more?
Well, my company is Command Your Brand, and free speech is a very important part of, moving the ball forward, frankly, to continue to be able to do and operate and whatever they might be. And we help businesses and entrepreneurs actually appear on the right podcasts, high level podcasts where they're going to create attention. So if you want to find out more about that, you can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. I also put together a great resource for your audience where they can, if they're a business owner, an entrepreneur, somebody out there trying to make it happen, they can start making an impact online with a lot of things I teach right now if they head over to commandyourempire.com. Or I am Jeremy Ryan Slate everywhere.
All right, right on. I'll put all that in the episode show notes, and I highly encourage all the listeners to go engage with your work further, man. Because I like I said, the way you're able to articulate the historical context and put it to the modern day, and actually really give some like the parallels are right there. And you're, I think, hitting the nail on the head with the direction that we're moving in. So, and I think you make it more digestible. Sometimes historians are like, I don't know. They speak for other historians, but I feel like you're able to articulate it in a way where somebody who isn't as engaged in historical reading or even, doing all the research, you're actually able to articulate it in a way that makes sense and is relatable. And I think that's a valuable skill. So I definitely appreciate all the work you're doing and for coming on to share it. It's truly been a blessing.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode. Special thank you to Jeremy for coming on the Fifth Dimension. I really enjoyed this podcast, and I hope you guys did as well. A lot of information to unpack when we're looking at the parallels between the United States and the Roman Empire, and hopefully this helped give you a little guidance on how to do so and looking at the direction that we're moving in as a country. There's a lot of uncertainty, certainly, but I think it's safe to say we can use the lessons of the Roman Empire to help navigate and better understand the system that we're living in and the direction that we're moving. So I look forward to the next time Jeremy and I get to podcast, because this is an ever ongoing discussion in a lot of ways. So if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on. Leaving a 5-star review does help the show. You can purchase a copy of my latest poetry book, The Final Judgment. It's available on Amazon. Also subscribe to my Substack, McDermod.substack.com, and you can book a tarot reading with me one-on-one if you want to work a little bit more in depth with me personally. It's going to wrap up this episode. Be sure to subscribe. A lot of great episodes coming your way in the very near future, and I'll see you next time.